Hey everyone, and welcome to TurboPrint Robotics. A lot of my robotics projects weren't very popular on my other channel, so I decided to put them over here and kind of keep everything isolated. What I have for you today is my newest modular robot design. I designed this robot to be a jack of all trades sort of, so it's not really going to be perfect for any one application. However, it can be configured in multiple different ways. The way I've configured it is just to kind of test all of the parts I've designed for this. So we got the drive axles and the steering axles, or arms I guess, would be more appropriate. However, you could configure this with just driving axles and set it up so that it's skid steer. You could set this up with multiple driving axles and one steering axle, or multiple steering axles and multiple driving axles, depending on what sort of application you might have in mind for this. When it comes to application, I originally designed this as a robot that will hold a snowblower and possibly a lawnmower and a salt spreader. This as sort of an update to the tracked snowblower robot and the other previous wheeled robot. In this configuration, it could also be used as a delivery robot if you placed a receptacle or cooler on top to store the food. My current setup is to have it completely remote driven, however this could be done however you want, and I'm toying with using a LoRa kind of control system set up to my desktop computer in the future, but that's a long ways off. Going over the design of the robot, I'll start with the main frame, which is just an aluminum rectangle tube, inch and a half by 3/4, which for metric is about 38 millimeters by 19 millimeters. Everything is mounted to this tube, the suspension mounts and the tower for the radio and cameras. Now the suspension on this is just a 12 millimeter tube as the hanger for the suspension arms, and a single leaf spring with a stopper in the middle. Everything but the tube and the fasteners are 3D printed. Both springs are the same front and back. For steering on the front here, I've gone with 2 servos, one on each side. I've made a single piece glued together spindle that uses 6 millimeter ball bearings out of airsoft pellets. This hub is held to a knuckle, which is connected to the servo arm. The steering arms are open and not covered for experimental reasons and ease of access. Eventually I plan on closing these down the road. Moving on to the rear axle, we have a motor per wheel on the driving axles, and the gear reduction is ended by a gear sitting on a bushing on an 8 millimeter shaft or tube with a set of 6 millimeter ball bearing thrust bearings that are angular contact to support the large outhang of the wheel from the gearbox and support a fair amount of weight. And for this use case, I made all the wheels fit the standard RC 12 millimeter hubs. For motors in this application, I'm just using standard 12 volt, very high turn 550 motors. I chose this motor for my design as there's a bunch of different options for everybody who has different application ideas for this robot. Obviously, brushless would be an option, but those parts aren't cheap, so I'm going on the cheap for prototyping, and if things take off or this works well, I'll upgrade in the future. So far, I've only managed to do a little bit of testing with this, but I've decided to give the files away and see what anybody else comes up with, or see if it drums up any interest. So far in my testing, it's been relatively decent when it comes to suspension wise, but I'm having power issues, but I think that's more of the motor controller that I'm using, which is not what I intend to be using in the long term. It's just kind of parts I had kicking around. I successfully traversed a couple different obstacles without anything failing or breaking, but touring through the grass seemed to cause some sort of slowdown and drag. It just seemed to be on a power end, not so much on the motor side or the gearbox end. This seemed to happen with the snowblower robot, and this is the same motor controller, so it's likely the culprit. And at this point, you're caught up to where I am. So like I said, I'm going to give these files away. I'm going to be placing the link in the description. It'll be on my Thingiverse and my cults page. I'm looking forward to doing more on this robot, but I basically need some more parts, and that costs money, and I don't have the money to spend on this sort of project right now. But that's about all I have for you now. I'm going to try and keep the videos on this channel short and sweet and update it as much as I can. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. You know the drill. And if you're interested in this project, please feel free to remix any parts or take anything here and modify it in however you see fit. At any rate, have yourself a good one, guys, and take it easy.